Welcome to the Cambridge Tech Podcast, talking all things technology from the heart of the UK's tech capital. Here are your hosts, Faye Holland and James Parton.
Hi, I'm Faye and I'm flying solo again this week. It was a very busy week last week and summer party season was in full swing. So quite obviously I was out and about. Starting off with Cambridge United Football Club's event where they talked about having the same ambitious mindset as many of our tech companies, which was a really good, interesting and refreshing approach. And I also went to Foresight Group, who, as you would expect, are very active in the Cambridge ecosystem and a serious investor globally. They were recently listed in a TechNation report as well with regards to their investment levels. So I think that's pretty much going to continue this week and for the next couple of weeks. So if you do see me out and about, then do come and say hello. My week last week finished off with the opening of the new premises of Reclinker, formerly known as Cambridge Electric Cement. So Reclinker, for those who don't know about them, they're a company really at the forefront of producing truly low carbon cement in a very scalable way. So it's always really great to see our startups beginning to grow, and in this case to see Reclinker's new home and their cutting edge lab. So thank you for the invite. So with regards to news, we've got 4 pieces of tech sector news for you today, and we'll start with Cambridge artificial intelligence trailblazer Cusp AI, who have recently unveiled a strategic alliance with Finnish headquartered global company Kemira for a water industry first. Kemira is a world leader in sustainable chemical solutions for water intensive industries, while Cusp AI pioneers materials science AI. By integrating this AI-driven insights from Cusp AI, Kemira aims to accelerate the discovery and optimization of new materials, positioning itself as a frontrunner in the chemical industry's digital transformation. The partners say that materials discovery, which can often take up to a decade, could be accelerated to as little as 6 months with AI, and the first project will target the removal of PFAS, which are forever chemicals, from water. Second, we have some great news from Cambridge-based automotive tech company Second Mind, which has set up its first United States operational presence. Based in Detroit, Michigan, the move is catalysed by the recent signing of a major Tier 1 supplier as a licensee of the company's cloud-native model-based engineering software. And alongside this US strategic office opening, they've also appointed Nick Appleyard as both country manager for the USA and Vice President of Sales and Business Development for North America and Europe. And CEO Gary Brockman, who's been on the podcast and we've talked about multiple times, said, "Establishing our presence in Detroit is a major milestone for Second Mind, and Nick is the ideal leader to help us strengthen our partnerships with global OEMs and Tier 1s to accelerate innovation and unify our Western sales efforts under a single focus strategy." So welcome to Nick, and yeah, I'm sure you've got lots of fun ahead of you. Next of all, we have a thought-provoking piece that has been released by the Raspberry Pi Foundation, a leading education charity focused on digital skills. They have published a report calling for urgent action to prepare young people for the age of AI. Philip Colligan, who's the CEO, is very concerned that schools may deprioritise computer science now that code is being written in many instances by AI systems. The report argues quite rightly that we still need skilled human programmers to control systems and make sure that what they produce is safe, ethical and relevant to the problems that we're trying to solve. So the report, Why Kids Still Need to Learn to Code in the Age of AI, is published on the Raspberry Pi Foundation website and is well worth a read. And finally, Cambridge-based energy storage company Super Dielectrics has launched its next-generation aqueous polymer battery, the Faraday 2, to kickstart a fresh phase of the clean tech revolution. The Faraday 2 builds on the success of the Faraday 1 prototype, being a major step towards the offering of a fridge-sized residential energy storage unit capable of reducing household electricity bills by 85% or more. So that's your news for this week, and now on to the episode, which is with founder and CEO of Spotta, Robert Fryers. Hi, Robert. Thanks for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So we were just talking before we started recording, and I was saying we first met properly with when you won 21 to Watch in 2021, but now you've just reminded me we actually met before then.
Yes, yeah. I think it was around 2018 or so when we were coming through the Accelerate programme at the Judge Business School.
Yeah, so everything always seems to link back to one accelerator or incubator or another, doesn't it?
Sounds about right, yep.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe we can come back and touch on that shortly. But why don't you just give everyone a quick introduction to who you are and life before Spotta?
Sure, okay. So I'm Robert Fryers. I'm the CEO of Spotta. Spotta makes early warning systems for insect infestations. So the big challenge with insects is that they grow exponentially, and if you only find out when you see the damage, there's already a huge amount of cost involved in that. We basically provide early warning systems, a bit like a smoke detector, but for insect infestation. So instead of blanket spraying stuff, you can go in and be targeted and do something in a more contained way and use less chemicals.
Perfect. And tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to be a founder of a startup?
Sure. So I studied as an engineer. My co-founder as well. We actually met at university. We worked together for about 5 years with another company, sort of learning the ropes of how to do engineering in the real world. We started our first business together in 2013, which was specifically set up to be a springboard for a product business. So we started doing consultancy and basically learning how to build products, take them into the real world, set up supply chains, and making all the screw-ups you make with that, but doing it with other people's money before we tried to do it with our own. And also scouting for an idea for a business. And we didn't know. We knew we wanted to build a scalable product business, something that could, make the world a better place and hopefully make us quite rich. But we didn't find that opportunity until quite a lot later, and that was around 2016.
Okay, that's interesting. So you always knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur and build a business, absolutely. But you were just finding you had an itch to scratch. Is that too much of a pun? I don't know. Neither me nor Neil particularly like being told what to do. Mm-hmm. So we were not very well suited to being the juniors in the team and being the dog's body person in those teams. We liked to call the shots pretty much. We'd both done things like starting student societies and building those up from scratch. We'd done a lot of that stuff earlier on in our careers. In 2013, it was a case of, okay, we know we want to do something that's going to make a difference. We know we want to build something really scalable, but we don't have a clue what. So let's go and explore a bunch of different industries and hopefully get paid as a consultant to do that. That was within our skill set, using the skills that we developed in low power electronics and a lot of the technical skills that became Spotta. But doing that with an eye to let's find an opportunity. And actually in 2013, when we started that, we knew nothing about insects, nothing at all. And it wasn't even until 2016 when we were talking to one of the big pest control companies and they were asking us to build them a better mousetrap. And that was the sort of light bulb moment of, okay, there's an industry here that hasn't really innovated for decades. And there's an opportunity for us to bring the technologies that we know about, really low power sensors, and do something really disruptive that will change the way these things are managed. And that triggered us to start looking at the broader market for pest monitoring. And everywhere we looked, it was like, there's grain stores, millions of dollars of damage a year. Textile factories, billions of dollars of damage a year. Agriculture, I could list 30 different agriculture. Every rock we lifted, basically, there was a multi-billion-dollar problem that wasn't adequately managed. Right. Okay, yeah, this is something here. We've got some technology that we know about. We've got a massive problem that's completely unmet. And when we totted it all up, it's about $500 billion of damage a year caused by insect pests. It's more economically important than all but the 20 richest countries in the world, which is pretty phenomenal in terms of a market opportunity. And that was what triggered us to start thinking about, okay, what can we do in this space? Can we build something that's going to be helpful?
And so going back to the start of the journey, because I want to come back and we'll come back and talk about the different industries and sectors as well in a moment. But when you first started, you'd kind of gone down the bed pod specific route, hadn't you? So, and tell us a little bit about that. So why did you land on that first of all? And then how quickly was it until you realised that there were all of these other things and these different insects that you could start addressing as well?
Okay, so because we sort of first spotted this opportunity coming through what's called the professional pest space. So this is the indoor residential domestic market and the commercial bits of it. The obvious first place that we started looking at to educate ourselves was things like rodents, cockroaches, termites, bedbugs, the things that people get at home. We didn't really at that stage have a huge amount of knowledge. Well, we had zero knowledge, but we didn't even have a huge amount of interest in the things like agriculture and forestry, which are now big parts of our business. That only really came over the first 12 months or so of us researching and learning more about this. And we were doing that while we were carrying on our consultancy business. So we were paying the bills by doing jobs for hire, for designing widgets for people, while starting to allocate increasingly big chunks of our time to this project as it got more and more exciting. By the time we reached raising investment for the first time, that was around 2018, end of 2018, we had made ourselves aware that there was this much, much bigger problem across all these different sectors, from domestic pets all the way through to textiles, to food storage, to pharmaceutical factories, all of these places. Had pretty much sort of got our heads around the headlines of those, but we didn't know the details of any of them. But we chose our first product to be for detecting bedbugs in hotels because we thought that was a market that was going to be, one, a product we could bring to market quickly. It's technically not as challenging as something that's got to go out in the wind and the rain and the dust of farms in the middle of nowhere. You're in a nice, relatively controlled environment. So an easier product to build and a very high value product. A hotel room is worth, ballpark £100 a night for someone. That's a very high value product compared to, a square metre of grain field, which is only a fraction of that. So that's why we started there. But the vision was always to go well beyond that. That was just the beachhead we pegged.
And was it, I'm trying to think, was it around the Olympics time? Was there a trigger like that?
There was, yes. Yeah. So actually we launched that product in February 2020, which was an abysmal time to go and try and start selling to the hotel. We sold 1,000 in the first week, and then and then every hotel in the world shut for 2 years, basically. And that very nearly killed us as a business. Yeah. But fortunately, our investors saw the bigger picture and backed us, and we continued investing and building out the other products. And now we're in a situation where we have multiple products across different sectors, all of them generating reasonable amounts of revenue now. But for a long time, we were a single product company in the hotel space. Through COVID, that was tough. And the point at which that market really re-emerged for us was when there was a lot of media coverage of bedbugs around Paris and London. It was in the run-up to the Olympics. It was the end of 2023. And that was the moment where, okay, yes, we've got to switch this back on, get hiring a team. And we 10x'd in revenue in about 3 months off the back of that. And that was the kickstart it needed to get it running again after COVID.
I mean, we are Cambridge Tech Podcast, so I really want to spend some time talking about the tech. You've kind of touched on it a little bit in terms of mentioning sensors and IoT and stuff like that, but take us through the actual technology. What have you built? What have you kind of rolled out, and how does that vary by different use cases?
Sure. So the sort of abstracted version of the solution is that it is a real-time monitoring system for insects. So it will tell you exactly when and where insects are present so that you can get in and be targeted. And when we identified the problem, we were relatively solution agnostic about how we'd solve that. But we looked at a variety of different ways of doing it. There are various people out there trying to do it, from satellite imagery to drones to apps on your smartphone that will tell you what's this bug. We quite quickly narrowed it down to, you have to be close. Insects are small. You can't see them from space. That's just not possible. You can see the damage they do, but by that point it's too late. And having a person go to it isn't acceptable. So you quite quickly narrow down the problem space to just a couple of routes. Either you have a mobile device that will go and detect them and move around, something like a drone, or you have a permanently installed device that you fit and forget about. And we didn't choose the drone approach, partly because it doesn't work indoors, so you can't do that in a hotel, but also you can't be watching all the time because it can only be in one place at a time. And often, these insects, they come out at night, they might be underground, it's very difficult to pick them up from a moving platform. So clearly for as we saw it, getting a system that would work robustly for any insect anywhere in the world, it had to be a physical device that you put in place and left, and that's what gives you the real-time data. And then that throws up a whole range of different challenges, because actually if you're going to leave them in place and they're not mobile, for that to be useful, you've got to put a lot of them out there. And if you're going to put a lot of them out there, they've got to be very, very cheap, particularly if you're going to put them onto a farm. And we'd seen a sort of a graveyard of startups that hadn't really got going, abandoned projects from the big players, all building devices that cost thousands of dollars a unit to build. And that's completely unviable. So we concluded right from the very start, we had to build something that was going to be a fraction of that cost, orders of magnitude lower cost than that. And using our skills that we had in low power sensors, what can we do in that? And the technology that we settled on was an ultra low power vision system. There were a variety of different ways you can do it, but this is the one that we believe is the most effective way that is transferable to any insect. And the key invention that became Spotta was basically taking the sort of vision system that you'd normally expect to require a big NVIDIA graphics card or direct access to some cloud computing platform, and crunching it down and containing the problem space to make it fit on a small, cheap device that can run for a year off an alkaline battery without any external connection. Making a system that can do that is phenomenally difficult. You can't go anywhere near an operating system. You can't go anywhere near something as powerful as Raspberry Pi. You've got to do it in a much more constrained processing environment. And that closes off a lot of the go-to methods. But fortunately, we'd spent the previous 10 years working on low-power sensors for things like Formula One, for pacemakers, for a variety of different applications. So this was exactly our bread and butter. And it's a pretty rare skill set, because nearly everyone in this space who's looking at using AI is using a cloud processing platform or is using an NVIDIA Jetson. And those solutions just don't work in outdoor agriculture, forestry. They're just not viable. So we had a pretty unique skill set. We had some unique technologies, and we innovated around those, and we have a pretty strong patent portfolio now about the way we've solved that problem. But it's an ultra low power vision system that can run continuously. And then around that, we've added a bunch of other technologies that we've developed over time to allow us to do forecasting, to allow us to do controlled dispense of pheromones, so that we can run for very long times without anyone having to touch these devices. 6 months to a year between anyone having to go and service them is typical for us. All our other competitors, it's typically 2 weeks. And 2 weeks is useless if you've got to send someone up a mountain every time to do it.
I've got a bunch of questions off the back of that, but I'll try and do them in a sensible order. So it sounds like you design both the hardware then and the software that's running in these devices. Okay. And the device is using computer vision to kind of detect the presence of the insects. Is it actually doing any treatment or intervention at that point, or is it just flagging that they're there?
Good question. So right now, today, Spotta is a monitoring system. Right. On our roadmap, we have plans to get involved in coordinating and directing the treatment side of things. And actually, some of the big projects we have going on in the Middle East are exactly that. So integrating in with their work order system to dispatch teams and then check whether the teams have actually been successful. Because if you don't see the population drop in the way you expected, clearly the treatment didn't work or it didn't happen. So you can start closing that feedback loop and ensure best practice. But our technology is not around treatment. There are other companies out there that do that we're happy to integrate with. But our bit is the missing piece in the puzzle. Just to wind back slightly, there's a huge amount of regulatory pressure on all of these industries to reduce the amount of chemical that's being used. And some of the big players in this space are starting to see that the writing is on the wall and that they can't be like the tobacco industry. They're going to have to adapt and adopt new technologies. Just selling more barrels of chemicals is not going to be tolerated, particularly in Europe and probably not in the US either. So how do they protect their top line revenue? Pick any of the household names, big chemicals companies, turning over 5 to 10 billion euros of chemical sales. They're being told by the regulators they've got to halve that by 2035. How do they defend that revenue of 5 billion that they're otherwise going to lose? They have to do something smarter. And we are very deliberately positioning Spotta as the keystone technology to enable that across the board, where they can add as much value while using less chemical.
It kind of reminds me a little bit. Have you ever come across infestations?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, so it's that same micro technology but they're doing it with water flow in pipes, and it's a tiny device. So just give us an idea of the order of magnitude of the devices.
So they vary depending on the insect. So our bedbug product is about the size of a pack of cards. and it tucks underneath the mattress. But we have another product which is for a pest called red palm weevil, which is a great big beetle about the size of your thumb, and that thing's about the size of a football because it's got to be able to, it's got to be proportionate to the size of the insect. And our entomology team spend a lot of time looking at shapes, colours, textures, pheromones that will get the insect inside the device so that we can detect it effectively.
Right.
And in terms of the protection of the power consumption is obviously key, right? So is all the compute done off the device, or how are you doing that?
Great question. And actually, when we started this is back to the, doing our IP landscaping and seeing how people had tried to solve this problem before. We found a graveyard of abandoned projects of people who had either tried to do all the computing on the edge, which means you need a very powerful computer in your device, which makes it expensive and power hungry, or they'd basically tried to set up a CCTV system streaming all the data back up to the cloud so they could do the computing in an easy location. But then again, you need high bandwidth and you need high power. And we actually split those two and do it in a smarter way so that our device can be very low power and low cost, but we still get the benefit of the final decision being made by a essentially power unlimited system up in the cloud. Yeah.
You talked about some of the different industries earlier on. It's got applicability across so many things.
Yeah.
I'm now thinking about heartfelt technologies and how they monitor people as they come out of bed. So there's similarities, but there's quite big differences as well. So you have Spotta installed in 18 countries. Are you doing different things? Can you give us a bit of a flavour of what kind of sectors you're in?
Okay, so it's actually up a bit from that. I think we're up to about 24 now.
Oh, wow.
So our biggest product to date is our bedbug product. It's our oldest, our most mature business. It's probably about it's the majority of our fleet that's out there of the 17,000 monitors we've deployed so far. But we also have installations active in forestry for pests that kill young trees. We have installations for red palm weevil, which is this pest that affects date palms in the Middle East, where we're working with governments in that part of the world. And then we also have a number of other products in the pipeline piloting phase for horticultural crops as well. So we're starting to spread our wings. It's for the startup of our stage, it's the classic problem. You have a platform, there's so many places you could take it, there's so many lucrative places you could take it, but actually you've got to pick a few and focus. So we're really focusing on 3 markets at the moment. But longer term, we're going to be doing this at a much wider range of different applications.
And how's that expansion been, going into different countries, and different cultures?
Experience.
And
Yeah. I think we, like a lot of tech founders, overestimated the importance of the technical challenge and underestimated the importance of the commercial challenge. And it's something we've got a huge amount better at. That even the culture shock that I found going and selling to hotels, the people I met in hotels are lovely, but they're very different to me as, a Cambridge engineer. And the way I, would sit down and describe our product is, here's the ROI, here's the spreadsheet that explains why this is good financial sense. And that just doesn't really, it's part of the equation, but it's missing massive chunks of what you need to be able to sell to someone who has chosen to spend their life in hospitality, giving people a great stay. Yeah. And a lot of the other softer parts of that, I wasn't equipped to sell that, and we've had to build out a team of people who know how to do that, and we've upskilled ourselves in that process. And similarly, I now spend a lot of my time going and working on our projects in the Middle East, where I'm working with ministers and deputy ministers of agriculture. And again, completely different culture, very different business environment, not only from Western startup to Middle East, but also from startup to government. Those are two challenging culture shifts, and you will overlay those on top of each other, and there's a lot of learning you have to do before you can be effective and be able to help those people. And we've made good progress on that, but one of the things we've learned is actually really, really the importance of having people who know those industries. Coming in as an outsider is really tough, and you want at least to have some advisors, but preferably some people on the team who really know those things as early as you possibly can.
Can I just drill down into that kind of that sales and marketing piece then? Because, as you'd expect, we talk to loads of, Cambridge-based startups, and, they're very similar, right? They come from an engineering or a software engineering background, or a life sciences background. So, they need to figure out the sales and marketing piece. So it sounds like you spend a lot of time talking to customers and learning from customers, which is always a great way to do that. As 2 engineering founders then, I guess it's a 2-part question. It's like, how do you go find the sales talent to bring into the organization? And then how did you kind of adjust? Because I'm guessing the company culture was quite engineering, right? Because the founders are engineers, so that's natural. So how does the culture of the company change as you start to bring in more kind of business kind of roles and salespeople?
Okay, so that's something we were very deliberate about from the start, because Neil and I, I would describe ourselves as business people first now, engineers, almost a bit of a memory, and very occasionally I get to do something technical that's quite exciting, but it happens once every 6 months or so. We'd been running our own business for 5 years. We'd been, the only thing that put food on the table when we were running that consultancy was our own sales effort. So we were quite familiar with that. And my sort of lesson I've learned over the last few years is that you can't teach someone to sell something until you can sell it yourself. And nearly all startups, the early sales are made by the founders. You might be able to kid yourself that you can hire someone who will just take this problem away for you. Our experience is that you can't. Maybe there are exceptions to that, but in our experience, you can't. And until you have at least a little bit of a playbook of what works and what doesn't, you can't bring someone else to delegate that to. You can definitely bring in experts to advise and help you. So we had a great run in the very early days where Neil and I were out selling to hotels, and we brought in hotel experts to essentially wing person us in those meetings, and they're thinking about the fact that their bonus is based on this and you need to change your offering in this way, that sort of thing. But they can't go and do the sale until you can do it yourself, because no one can explain your product in the way that you as the founders can. And it's not like you've got a wealth of technical documentation when someone asks a question of how does this bit of it work. No one else knows that apart from the people who have built it to begin with. So we came at it very, very deliberately from a commercial angle, and something we've actually strengthened a lot over time is very early on proving willingness to pay from customers, making sure there's we never do free trials. I will never do a free trial ever again. It's a complete waste of time. That was a hard-learned lesson. That sort of thing. The other thing that we've done around building the company culture is, you're right, we hire a fantastic team of very high-flying technical people, but we've always had an eye to people who have an interest in the commercial side of the business. Someone who just wants to go in and be in their little silo and just hammer the keyboard isn't really a fit at Spotta particularly well. We want people who understand and are interested in the wider business. And on the flip side, when we hire commercial people, they have to be, they don't have to be able to do the technology, obviously, that's not their skill set, but they do at least have to have, be interested and have some sort of understanding of what the technology allows the customer to do, even if they don't understand the ins and outs of what's going on under the hood. Although generally most of our team do. So I saw a lot of startups that had this hard divide between technical and commercial, and there's sort of a bit of a gulf between them. And we very deliberately made sure that didn't happen with Spotta by making sure we hired people who had an interest both sides. And we try to encourage everyone on the team to have customer contact very regularly. And equally, the sales team, they'll get hands-on with a prototype before it's ready to go to see what's coming as well, because it just knits the team together. Whether we'll be able to sustain that when we get, we're 30 people now, when we get to 100 people, will we be able to sustain that? I don't know, but we're going to try very hard. Yeah, no,
there's some great insights there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that let's have you back on to talk about how do you sustain it, or can you not, when you've grown that far, because I think it's quite important. You want to keep that, but the reality is, you probably can't.
It's challenging. So far, it's worked very well. We do simple things like once a week, someone in the team will stand up and just talk for 15 minutes to the team about what they're working on, and that might be one of the salespeople talking about their deals. It might be one of the guys talking about a new feature they're adding to the software. It might be the guy who's out running the field trials for a project we're doing in another country has just got back, and here are the results hot off the press of that, for example. So that everyone in the company, and we do expect everyone to join those, so that you're sort of almost forced to absorb what's going on in other bits. And while it's a bit of a cost, the time cost to bring the whole company together, it's only a relatively small amount of time. We think it's quite important to keep reinforcing that stitching between the different parts of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. To be honest, we see it a lot when companies have grown so far and they've stopped doing it. You almost have to start doing it again to get everyone properly engaged with each of the different departments. So as long as you can keep it going, the better. So we talked earlier on about cutting the use of pesticides being a big focus, obviously, for everyone. And I noted that you've recently received the Khalifa International Award for Date Palm and Agricultural Innovation. So congratulations, by the way.
Thanks.
How important is that sustainability part? Because when you very first started the conversation, it was like, well, let's do something and we can make some money. And then you've found a problem, you've found multiple ways of fixing it. How much is sustainability part of your ethos now?
It's really interesting, actually. It's something where my position on this has shifted a lot since we started Spotta. So when we started Spotta, we were looking at indoor pests. The sustainability angle wasn't particularly strong, and we thought this is going to be a pretty classic, Cambridge angel-backed business where we'll grow, we'll get to a certain size, we'll exit at sort of a moderate size, and then I'll go and get on with the rest of my life and do something impactful with the money I'll make in this process. And it was about, for me, and we'd have to ask Neil when it happened for him, but for me, about 2 years into the journey, when we started making inroads into, it was actually during COVID when we started doing work in forestry and agriculture for the first time, where I started properly educating myself about how the world manages insect pests. And it is horrific, absolutely horrific. 4 million tons of chemical insecticide, literally poisoning the planet. And it has to change. It has to change. And that was for me, the light bulb moment of, okay, actually Spotta isn't the vehicle to get the capital to go and do something. Spotta is the vehicle to have the impact I want to have. And I've started, I try not to get too preachy with the team because I know for some people it's really front and center, and I think it's increasingly important for Spotta. But for me personally, the mission side of it has become absolutely central to why I'm doing this. And if we can help this transition, because it's only going to happen if it makes economic sense and environmental sense. It's not going to happen otherwise. And we think we have a way of making the agrochemicals companies more profitable, the farmers more profitable, and use less chemical in that perfect triangle by dropping in our technology to change the way it's managed at the moment. And we're starting to build up really credible case studies of doing that in several cases now, which is really exciting because there's no reason why we can't take what we've demonstrated in date palms and start copying that across to all the other different pests out there.
So earlier in the conversation, you touched on your investors and had been saying they were patient, during the lockdown, which was great. So you're obviously a venture-backed business. So tell us a little bit about your kind of fundraising story.
Sure.
How was the pitch received, and how have you kind of pivoted or enhanced that pitch over time, and kind of where are you right now in that journey, and are you looking to raise future funds? Just give us some
Sure.
kind of insights.
So we've just completed an investment round. It was a few £1 million led primarily by a VC group called Yield Lab, who are an agritech specialist fund. They led our previous round as well, actually. Been extremely supportive, and they know this sector. They provided a lot of the insight, back to having the right wing people there to help guide and provide the sector knowledge. They've been absolutely invaluable with that. But our earlier rounds were led primarily by the Cambridge Angels and the CCG groups. So we first raise was in end of 2018, beginning of 2019, and that was a pretty classic pre-seed raise of, we had a working prototype, we had a customer lined up, and we didn't have the money to buy the injection mold tools basically, and to pay our salaries for long enough to go and do the next bit of it. So that was, it was a few $100,000 to get that off the ground and get that product launched. And that lasted us through, we were to beginning of 2020, and the results were very good. The product worked in the field. We had the first couple of thousand of them out there getting good results and happy customers. So we followed that up with a seed round at that stage, or the names get confused, but a slightly bigger round. And that was the point at which obviously COVID hit and we had to completely pivot our plans. So that we had sort of a couple of iterations of that over the years, and then from about 2023 is where we really hit an inflection point of growth. Coming out of COVID, hotel business coming back strongly. Other products had enough time to actually reach some maturity and get some revenue because we only started those at the beginning of COVID. So those things all came together, and now we're pretty much into growth phase now.
You just mentioned Cambridge Angels then, and I recall an interview that you did with them where you said you want Spotta to be a unicorn. So do you still want Spotta to be a unicorn, and what are you doing to be able to get to that status?
Well, the first and probably the most important thing is the stepping back and abstracting, looking at the bigger problem. We started off with some idea that pests were an issue and we're going to solve bedbugs. And now our starting point is insect pests are a $500 billion problem. Yeah. This is a global, and also from a sustainability point of view, insect pests account for about 2% of global CO2 emissions. So 20% of all the food grown doesn't make it off the field because of insect pests. It gets eaten by bugs, and not the good type of bugs. It's because we have massive monocultures and we have the same, huge populations of damaging insects that are completely unnatural but exist because of the way we do farming. 20% of the crops, 10% of global CO2 is from agriculture. So simple maths on that. 2% of CO2 is largely going into feeding bugs that are not naturally part of the ecosystem. That's the aviation industry. That's the entire aviation industry's level of CO2. So taking a chunk out of that is valuable, both financially and also to humankind and to the planet. So the scale of the problem here, the fact that we have a unique technology, we are the leading technology in each of the markets we're in. There are large businesses out there that are facing multi-billion-dollar a year revenue hits because of incoming regulations. There is absolutely no reason why we can't build this business to be worth billions. From where we are now, having succeeded in 4 different products, we've got revenue in each of them, we've demonstrated impact in each of them. Frankly, it would almost be disappointing if we didn't from this point, says he, very blasé and with a huge amount of hubris, I'm sure. But we can have, whether it's Spotta, whether it's someone else solving the same problem, this problem is going to result in billion-dollar companies. Our job is to make sure that's Spotta and not someone else.
I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation. You've already dropped a bunch of nuggets throughout the conversation. But as we kind of start to wrap up, I guess there's 2 things that are springing to mind. One, it'd be interesting you touched on how the VCs have helped you and you were backed by Cambridge Angels. It'd be interesting just to get your take on how the Cambridge ecosystem has supported you. You mentioned you've been through some Accelerate programs and stuff like that. So that would be interesting. And then as a follow-on from that, what would your advice be to, say a student listening to this that's thinking about maybe starting a business or wants to be an entrepreneur, trying to find that, that opportunity that you described?
Okay. So in terms of the Cambridge ecosystem, it is a fantastic place to start a business. There's a huge, huge amount of support for getting from the 0 to 1 stage, 1 being, sort of $1 million of revenue for classic, being ready for growth stage funding. In terms of the people who understand how to, get the business going, the early stage funding that's available from angels, the support and infrastructure that's around, for example, grants are a fantastic way to get started in the very early days to avoid taking lots of dilution, particularly if you're doing something deep tech that's going to take a little while to gestate and get to market. And obviously, absolute world centre for specific technical areas. So it's a fantastic place to start. What you do need to find as you start looking to the longer term is the funding for later stages, and this isn't a particular Cambridge problem, this is actually right now a global problem, but it's also more specifically a UK problem. There's a bit of a gap around Series A, Series B. Obviously, less relevant if you're just starting out, but being aware that you might need to look elsewhere for that later stage funding. Although that is changing, there's increasingly more around here. But the other thing that's really strong is I find that people in Cambridge, everyone is out to help each other in a way that I just don't see when I visit other places. You go to Silicon Valley and it's very dog eat dog, and no one will tell you the name of their lawyer because they don't want you pinching them. Whereas here, actually, if someone's got a great service provider who's helping with early stage startup accountancy or R&D tax credits or whatever it might be, there's a very much a share and share alike attitude, which I think is phenomenal. But you have to find it a little bit. We found a lot of that came through the portfolio at Cambridge Angels, but it also came through things like the Accelerate program at the Judge. The engineering department runs some excellent entrepreneur events. So there's quite a few sort of access points to the ecosystem, but you do have to put yourself out there and strike up conversations. There isn't a database you can go look it up. You have to do it through building some connections and having some conversations.
And I think the second part of the question was that what piece of advice would you give?
To people thinking of starting? Do it. Basically, it's very easy to spend a long time thinking about things and actually find some pain to solve. That's the thing that we found. We started with a little bit of a technology push attitude, and what we've learned over the years is very much start with the customer and the pain. And if you don't know any customers to ask them about their pains, that's where you have to start. You have to go and talk to customers. You can't build a business without knowing who that is. Even if you are, the deepest of deep tech coming up with quantum computers, you need to go and understand what is limiting, wherever you're going to put them into data centers or whatever. And he's going to talk to people who understand what the limitations are now and what your solution would solve. Because without that, you won't be able to have credible conversations with the ecosystem that you're trying to get into, even if your technology is the most phenomenal thing in the world. So getting to customers, starting with pain, working back from there, There's a famous saying, but I always forget who it's by, but you fall in love with the problem you're solving, not your solution to it. Because actually the thing you think you're going to build is almost certainly not the thing, if you are successful. The average startup pivots at least twice. It's very rare your first business plan. I think I met one other founder who's actually executed their first business plan and it went along that path out of hundreds and hundreds. The vast majority of them, and the ones who've been most successful, it's been an up and down roller coaster and you've zigged and zagged around the place to find the right route, because you only know when you're talking to customers.
Yeah, it's that old struggling moments. You've got to, going back to your example about the hotels earlier on, you've got to talk in their language as well, haven't you? So it's been absolutely brilliant, Robert. It's been a while, but you've developed so far, and you're seeming to do very well. So let's get you on that path for unicorn status. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Today's show was produced by Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and supported by our media partner, Business Weekly. The Cambridge Tech Podcast is available on all major podcast platforms and on cambridgetechpodcast.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It'll really help others discover the show.
If you are a startup looking to grow in Cambridge, the Bradfield Centre offers a range of flexible membership packages which put you in control of your office and home working mix. There's a vibrant, collaborative atmosphere, on-site cafe, plenty of green outside space, and regular member social events. For more information, visit bradfieldcentre.com or call 01223 919 600.